SOAS gitu untuk memperoleh gerak doktornya dari SOAS ya. Pak Peter ini sangat aktif dan banyak menulis yang kaitannya dengan kalau di tempat kita disebutnya adalah arkeologi klasik ya, yaitu era-era periode Hindu-Buddha. Banyak sekali tulisan-tulisannya bisa diakses di https://soas.academic.edu Peter J. Salox. Jadi bisa dilihat karya-karya Pak Peter ada di sana. Dan salah satu publikasinya yang terbaru yang diberi title The Creative Thought, Buddhist and Hindu in Medieval Maritime Asia yang diterbitkan pada tahun 2022 oleh Asia Singapura. Dan ini adalah bagian nanti yang akan dipresentasikan oleh Pak Peter dalam kuliah ini. Oke, tanpa berpanjang lebar, we give the time to Pak Peter to deliver the lecture. The time is yours, Pak Peter.
Well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
My lecture. I have to give my lecture in English because my Bahasa is poor and my Javanese almost non-existent. So I apologize for that. I will try and speak slowly and not use technical terms. And I hope that that I'll be understandable. Before I share my screen, let me just say that I want to take a broad look across the region of Maritime Asia. So all the southern coast of the Asian landmass, both the states on land and the states on the islands. Because I think in looking across many cultures, we're starting to get a clearer picture of what was happening in this region of the world in the classical period. And what is emerging is something very important. And that is that kingdoms like those in Java, Sumatra, Srivijaya, Nusantara, Cambodia, Champa, or Thailand, or pre-Thailand, Dvaravati, all these cultures became very powerful in connecting with the sea. So they became economically powerful. The trade was bringing a lot of economic wealth to these societies. They were growing rapidly. They were very creative people, and they soon, because they had an international outlook, they absorbed ideas, philosophies, cultures, religions from anywhere and made it their own. And soon they were teaching the rest of the world. So that in the period, I'm going to try and persuade you that in the period between the 9th and the 14th centuries, the real growth in human ideas, in human art and architecture, in religious ideas, was happening here in the South, the creative South. Not in India, where lots of problems were arising, particularly for the Buddhists. Not so much in China, which had a lot of problems in, certainly the Buddhists did in the 9th century, and dynastic change, but in the South, in the island cultures. And so I and a number of scholars, we had conferences in Yogyakarta, in Java, looking at the achievements of the people in what we call the creative South. And that's the title of the book. So I'm going to try and give you a quick overview of some of the main ideas in that book. Mimi is a contributor. There are more than 20 contributors altogether. And And so I'll now share my screen. Here it is. So there we are. That is the cover of the book, The Creative South, Volume 1, Buddhist and Hindu Art in Medieval Maritime Asia. And it's edited by Andrea Acri, whom some of you will know, and by me. And it's about Asian states from the 9th to the 14th centuries. Early historians in the colonial period saw medieval, saw the southern states as being a mere conduit for the transmission of ideas from India to China. They even called Southeast Asia is a new word, it's after the Second World War. It was a war theater, basically fighting the Japanese. But they saw the states of Southeast Asia that were emerging in these centuries as being greater India. So they thought India had colonized these countries. When they looked at the records, they could find no trace of Indians coming to these societies. It was on the contrary, the peoples of the growing states along the maritime trade route who were looking to India and looking to China for ideas, religious ideas, technical ideas, commercial ideas, economic ideas, and they were growing at a very fast rate. We're now starting to look at how the innovation of the South was quite remarkable. And the scholars are asking themselves these questions. Why are the largest and most innovative monuments designed by Buddhist and for Buddhist and Hindu temples to be found in Java, for example, and in Angkor? Why are the largest ones ever built on Earth in these countries? That's the question. What does that say about these societies? What does that say about the importance of these societies compared with anywhere? They are bigger than anything in India, bigger than anything in China. So how do we account for that? How do we explain it? And why was it that the dominant Buddhist political religious philosophy of state protection, why did it develop outside India? And it did not when it didn't develop in India itself. So there were things that happened when ideas, the Buddha's philosophy and the Hindu philosophy arrived across the sea, which changed dramatically. So the sea routes provided the opportunity to innovate. If you're on the edge of India and you have some visiting Brahmins or Buddhists, a number of them, and they are imparting new philosophies into your culture, there is an opportunity to innovate, to change things. And if you've got a very creative people who have the wealth which is coming from the growing trade links, and if they have the technical ability to master building techniques, shipping techniques, and everything, then that is where the new ideas are going to grow. So we are now getting the impression that the growth in religious, political, and philosophical ideas was taking place in the South, in these places more recently touched by some basic ideas coming from India. So they developed a role along the southern edge of Asia, this leading creative ritual technology in art and architecture. They took things way beyond where they had gone in India. And they were done on a scale that was never seen in China. Now, this is where I come into Southeast Asia. I've been writing about Southeast Asia for a very long time. First of all, as a war correspondent in Vietnam and Cambodia. Later, when after the Khmer Rouge period ended and when Vietnam opened to the outside world again after the war, I went to visit the temples. This is the Bayon Temple in Angkor, to write a PhD on ancient Cambodia. I did it at SOAS, as Mimi Savitri did. Here is the latest publication. Volume 1 has just come out of the Creative South. It's published in Singapore. And I wanted to just briefly mention a couple of chapters. There's an exceptional one by Ian Sinclair. He is a scholar who's now in Australia. And he has looked at a form of Avalokiteshvara, the compassionate Buddhist bodhisattva, who is called Amoghapasha. Amoga is unfailing, Pasha is noose. So he has a noose of string and he can help you. And Amoghapasha became a very important deity right across Asia. He's because he helps when if your parents or someone in your family dies, he will help them when it's decided where they are going after their death into their next life. So you can transmit merit to your family members who pass away in the next life. So this was a very important ritual for families across Asia. And it was a Buddhist ritual. So in Buddhist communities, it was Amoghapasha who was important. That is, and this deity is first found in the peninsula, the Thai and Malaysian peninsula that we would call Srivijaya in the ancient period. And Amoghapasha's cult spread right to Asia and went back to India. So here was a great bodhisattva, a great Buddhist figure created in the South, going back to India. So not India sending a notion to Asia, to Maritime Asia, but Maritime Asia devising a new important ritual, a key ritual for people, which went back to India. Yuri Koklov sadly died last year. He was a Russian who did a wonderful piece of research into how the culture of South India leading Buddhist thinkers I will show you. Can interact. God appealed to the form of Buddha who protect you. And that I'm going to look at Java.
Aduh, mohon maaf Bapak-bapak, Ibu semuanya, ini sepertinya Pak Peter ada problem jaringan. Mohon bersabar. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry, the internet let us down a bit. We have other papers from Jina Kim in Harvard. She is looking at Pragma Paramitar. This is the powerful goddess of wisdom, supreme Buddhist wisdom, who is very important in Cambodia and very important in Java, particularly in the Singasari dynasty. Why was this goddess most important of all outside India? That's the answer. That's the question which Jinnah tries to write. It's a supreme goddess, and her cult is more developed than anywhere else on earth in Cambodia and Java. Okay, so that gives you an idea of some of the papers. So here is the question: why are the largest and most innovative and most elaborately designed Buddhist and Hindu temples and monumental ceremonial centers on earth found in Java and Angkor? Why? Here is Kalasan, the huge early Buddhist temple that you all know very well. Here is Sewu. A few years later, massive mandala shape, completely innovative design. Kalasan may be closer in design to Indian temples. Sewu is completely different and completely new in its layout and its meaning. Very, very complicated and very, very large. And then we get to Borobudur, which remains the largest Buddhist monument on earth. Now, why were the Javanese Buddhists building on a scale like this, way bigger than anything in India? On the Dieng Plateau, the temples to Shiva and the Hindu gods are more or less the same size as temples that are being built in India at the same time, 7th and 8th century. But in Borobudur, suddenly, we are on a different scale altogether. It shows a commitment to economy, to wealth, to innovation. And it's unlike, there is in Kesariya in North India, in Bihar, there is a shape, there is a temple built on a natural hill like Borobudur, which is comparable to this, but it's on a smaller scale. It was built by King Harsha in the 7th century. He was post-Gupta, and he was very well connected with China, and Suan Sang, the great translator and Buddhist monk who traveled through Southeast Asia, was his friend. So there is some similarity to that Kesariya temple, but this is much bigger, much more formal, and much more perfectly constructed. I don't have time to go into the complications of the mandala arrangements. Hudaya Kandajaya, who is in the Creative South book, has expounded at length a brilliant paper on how the two great mandalas, Buddhist mandalas of this period, are embedded in Borobudur. It's a complicated story, involves a lot of numerology, but I would, if you're interested in Borobudur, I would urge that you read it. It's Hudaya's latest. He's written about Borobudur a lot. This is his latest version. And what about Mendut? This link of 3 kilometers between Borobudur, where the gods are housed, and Mendut. Mendut you can go into. It's a palace. In between is Pawan, which is probably the design for Homer ritual. How did this dynasty require this vast ceremonial center from Borobudur, Pawan to Mendut? Marika Klokker has got some new thinking on what happened inside Mendut, but it does seem that that is a place where a king could go in to be consecrated as a Chakravarti, as the Buddha's king over all on earth. It is a place you can go into. It is a palace. So there's the ceremonial center. There is a lot of work still to be done on this. On the scale is what I'm drawing attention to. It is far bigger than anything in India. And here is a brilliant new computer reconstruction of the Prabanan Complex in Java, in central Java, which I guess we can put the construction date, perhaps some of you will disagree, around 960. This is reconstructed by Peter Jordan and Jeffrey Sundberg. There's Marapi in the background. And they are in this volume talking about how this was designed to create a huge volume of sacred water. Sundberg's theory is that the whole temple, this is the Shiva temple in the center, with these sort of stupa linga structures all over it, very close to similar ones in Cambodia, that the temple itself had become the deity. There was a cross between architecture holding a deity and the temple itself becoming a form of Shiva, so that the rain would flood down through all these, through the whole structure and fill the courtyard, which was designed at certain times of the year to be flooded with holy water. This is bringing the power of Shiva into the kingdom. Quite an extraordinary concept and on an extraordinary scale, unprecedented again. So here's a map by my colleague Swati Chembulkar in Mumbai, showing the travels of monks, mostly Chinese monks, through Southeast Asia on their way to India to study in the great monasteries in India. The Buddhists in India were related, of course, to the kings and the courts. They were supported by some kings. They were mostly supported by queens. So it wasn't a direct connection. It wasn't as direct as the Brahmins. The Brahmins were in the court. The Brahmins were advising the kings on everything on a daily basis. The Buddhists were in their monasteries. They were teaching the Buddhists of the whole world in those great monasteries, like Nalanda and Vikramashila. But they did not have a major role in the courts. They were withdrawn from society into their monasteries. And they were linked by all these great travelers and thinkers. Here are the names of the great teachers who came, some of them from India and through India, and some from China. And I will talk shortly about Vajrabodhi and Amoghavajra. What the Buddhists did outside India was they went into the courts, like the Brahmins were in the courts in India, and they directly influenced kings, and they became involved in the development, expansion, and protection of the state. That is what the Brahmins were doing in India, but not the Buddhists. The Buddhists didn't do it until they left India and moved into maritime Asia. That was the big innovation. So they used tantric rituals. If the state was confronting an enemy, then they would employ powerful tantric rituals to protect the state, to defend the king, to defend the army, and to weaken the opponents. So they were applying supernatural power in politics and religion. Here is Amoghavajra. Well, in the 5th century, we get the early Buddhists coming in, Farsian in the 5th century, and Gunavarman, who brought Buddhism and in fact converted a queen to Buddhism in Java. In the 7th century, Yi Jing comes through, and he talks about all the communities in the Southern Sea Islands, including Java and Kalimantan, where he said they were still basically following the early Buddhism of Farsian and Gunavarman. In the 8th century, there is a change. And this comes with the arrival of Vajrabodhi, who was a great prince from Kanchi. His father was the Purohita at the court, and Amoghavajra, they met, we think, in Java when Amoghavajra was 14 years old. He was actually from Samarkand in Central Asia, and he's thought to have come to Java with his father, who was a merchant. And the great advantage of being the great advantage of being born in Samarkand was that you had an education in Sanskrit, but you also knew Chinese. This was on the northern Silk Route, and Samarkand was at the the western end of it, and that's where we think Amoghavajra came from. So he was a young boy of 14 who met the great teacher Vajrabodhi in the 8th century in Java. Together, after traveling all around the region and visiting the Buddhist communities, they traveled together to China, and they began to propagate state protection Buddhism. This was a form which has enhanced anything that had been present in India. They had an Asia-wide strategy at this point. The Buddhists had a view of the whole of Asia, and they wanted to move it all in one powerful direction. The center was at Chang'an, the Chinese capital, and they brought in the most brilliant Buddhist scholars from all the countries around, from Japan, from Korea, from Java, from Srivijaya. So instead of going to Buddhist monasteries in India, at this stage, they were going to China, because Amoghavajra and Vajrabodhi had set up this very powerful school of Tantric Buddhism in the Chinese capital. And those who went there included Bien Hong from Java. He was a specialist in the ceremony which turned the Buddhist king into a Chakravartin. He went to Chang'an. We don't know whether he returned when Borobudur was constructed, but it was the end of the 8th century. Borobudur would have been some decades after that. And he knew in Chang'an Kukai, who was the great master of Tantric Buddhism in Japan. And as you know, there are similarities between the Buddhism that we can see in the temples of Java and the Buddhism of the Shingon sect in Japan. So here we have Bianhong and Kukai, two leading monks, knowing each other, meeting them in the school of Amoghavajra in China. Amoghavajra became the first Mandarin, and Yuri Koklov's paper in the Creative South shows how Amoghavajra not only brought Buddhist texts from South India, he also brought Buddhist art, so that the influence of South India and Srivijaya went through the art into China and eventually into Tibet. Now, Tibetans don't admit this. Tibetans say all their Buddhism came from India, direct. But what Yuri Koklov has shown is that, in fact, Tibetan Buddhism was very much influenced by the Chinese Buddhism that was being propagated by Vajrabodhi and Amoghavajra. Amoghavajra he's often called the first Mandarin. A Mandarin is not only, he's later on an advisor to the king at the court, royal mandarins, but he was the one who had the mantras. And Amoghavajra was the world champion in the rain ritual. All kings, when they're faced with drought, it's coming to our planet with global warming, they need someone who can generate rain. And the rain ritual was crucial to a king, and Amoghavajra was the champion of that. When he did the rain ritual to make it rain, if it rained within 4 days, he was paid a huge amount of money in silk, bales of silk, by the emperor. And out of all that money, he built 4,000 monasteries in China after his years at the court. He became very powerful, and he was made a duke by the emperor eventually. When the court was rocked by the An Lushan rebellion, he played a very significant part in helping the emperor resist the rebellion and maintain the state. So he was working again, his version of state protection Buddhism, which came from southern India and Srivijaya, Java. He performed countless esoteric initiations and state protection rituals. There were thousands of people that attended these things. It was all paid for by the emperor, and it was aimed at driving away evil forces and the enemies of the state. At one point, the Tibetan army threatened China, and Amoghavajra was sent by the emperor to the border, and he erected an altar with Buddhist deities on it, and went through the rituals to protect China against Tibet, against the Tibetan army. And it worked. The Tibetan army, for some reason, turned around and stopped threatening China. So again, that was the kind of success that Amoghavajra had as the state protective specialist in China. There we are. He initiated thousands of courtiers and generals in a long series in the mid-8th century, all at the expense of the emperor. Okay, and he died in 774. Now, Yuri Koklov has shown that if you look at the paintings, this is from the Mogao caves in the Hershey corridor, that the Buddhas there do not look Chinese. Their faces are more Indic, perhaps Southern Indian in form, and the their dress, particularly the armbands here with spikes of pearls on top. This is a courtly fashion which can be found in Pallava, India, and also in the peninsula on the Buddhas. It's these spikes of pearls on top of the bronze, which makes it a special style. It's also on the crown. You can see these spikes here. This is a Southern Indian and Srivijayan Javanese courtly dress fashion going to China into the caves of the Hershey corridor where Amoghavajra was operating. And here in the 9th and 10th century, this is a wooden traveling shrine, which a traveler over the mountains, you can fold it and open it. If you look very closely at the armbands of the central Buddha here and at the crown, you can see that it's still got the spikes carved into the wood that we saw on the other one. So this is a Tang Dynasty wooden shrine, beautifully carved, with vigorous tantric figures at the bottom here, and showing this imprinted clothing, sacred clothing, which came from maritime Asia. And there, finally, this is in the 11th century. These are old pictures of sculptures which were destroyed in the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong. This is a 1937 photograph, but showing exactly the same spiked and swagged. A swag is this hanging piece here, spiked and swagged armbands on the deity. This is Mahavairochana in the Bodhi Agri Mudra. These things have now been, unfortunately, lost. Now, Davidson, in the 10th to 11th centuries, the Brahmins had been moving south through India, gaining wealth and status. They were advising the kings. There are lots of copperplate inscriptions assigning land to Brahmins, courtly Brahmins. And they had developed tantric rituals to protect the city, to protect the state, to support kings who needed supernatural power from basically Shiva or Vishnu. And the power came from Vidyapita or Shakti Pita, which are pilgrimage sites, and all these, all the sites named here are in fact holy sites. That is grouped in semicircles around Kailasha. Kailasha is Shiva's mountain, and all these holy sites were basically venerating Shiva throughout, in the end, including Kanchi, in the 10th through 11th century throughout the subcontinent. And here, Suvarna Dvipa was also a site. So here we're talking about either Sumatra or Nusantara or Srivijaya. So included in this map of the holy Hindu sites is Suvarna Dvipa. These all mark the spots where Shiva's first wife, Sati, she threw herself into a sacrificial fire. I can't tell you the whole story. Shiva was very upset. He picked up Sati and put her on his shoulders, and he did a Tandava dance. That is the dance where he ends one epoch and begins another. It's the destructive dance of Shiva, which maintains the cosmos in an ongoing basis. And wherever a part of Sati's body fell to earth, this turned into a Vidyapita, a sacred site in India where rituals still go on. There are still many of them that are running. There is a goddess in each one. There are major ceremonies in each one. And what the Buddhists did was that they, in the Hivadra Tantra, the Buddhists wanted to overlay their deities, their fierce deities, their Heruka deities, onto all these sacred sites. And in the Hivadra Tantra, this is specified. The sites are listed. Now, this was a Buddhist strategy for rivaling the Brahmins' power by taking the Brahmin power into Buddhism. But this was never applied in India. So the only place that it was applied was outside. This is a Vishnu temple in Angkor. You all know Angkor Wat. We're now in the 12th century. And this was part of a network of Shaiva and Vaishnava sites built on a scale unprecedented in the world. Here is the succeeding king, Jayavarman VII. He was a Buddhist, and he turned the state religion to Buddhism, and he built two huge temples, the Bayon at Angkor and one at Banteay Chma. And from Banteay Chma, he launched attacks on Champa, where he was trying to get access to the Song dynasty trade. Now, our picture of Cambodia has changed rapidly with LiDAR archaeology, which, of course, you know, in Indonesia, there's a lot of Indonesian LiDAR companies looking at doing oil exploration. The scale of, I'm speeding up because I realize we're running out of time. The scale of Angkor was unprecedented. We now know that the LiDAR, in penetrating through the forest and looking at the ground level of house construction in wood, the archaeologists have worked out that the population was something like 800,000, almost 1 million. By far the biggest city on earth at the time outside China. Chang'an was probably the same size. This king built a hospital system for everyone, and there's a picture of the density of the population of Angkor. Now, if we take that map of Angkor and a map of London, with the M25, the new M25 motorway going all around London, those of you that know London, that's quite a long journey going around the M25. Well, Angkor just about fits within the M25 of London. It was a vast wooden city, growing rice with a road system, a canal system. It was enormous, and it was the biggest city on earth, as I say, outside China. And that is the expanded Cambodian kingdom. Cambodia today is the central piece of that, but at this point, it had occupied the coast of Champa and gone right down the peninsula to towards Srivijaya. Here are the two great temples constructed. This is the Bayon in Angkor, and this is Banteay Chma, far bigger scale, built to conduct the campaigns in Champa to bring them into the empire. This is a picture of the Bayon, which is, I think, 42 meters high. It's a huge rock tower in the center of Angkor, and it's distinguished by these huge faces facing in all directions on the towers. There is a picture by Olivier Cunin of what they were like when they were all in place. The faces, huge faces. This is a great architectural innovation. And so who is this Buddhist deity that appears way up there in the sky? Well, there are a lot of bronzes of the Hivadra deity in Angkor, with a tower of 8 heads like this, 16 arms and 4 legs. And it's possible that this is an architectural rendering of the multiple heads of the Hivadra deity. There are bronzes discovered in Angkor of Hivadra. There is 8 heads and 16 arms, with 8 yoginis dancing around it. So the Bayon seems related to this deity. Here are some of the beautiful bronzes of Hivadra dancing with his yogini. This one was excavated in the royal palace in Angkor, so it's probably the king's own icon. And there are about 100 of these in collections in Cambodia and in other museums. This one is for instance, in Berlin. And there are many conchas for abhishekas, for religious ceremonies with pictures of Hivadra on them. These are all Hivadra figures. So why were there so many needed? Well, it seems that to be able to go into the state temple, you had to go through some Hivadra vow ceremony. You had to acknowledge Hivadra, because otherwise you couldn't get into the temple. This huge statue of Hivadra, this is Olivier Cunan's drawing of the eastern entrance to the Bayon. This was erected after Jayavarman conquered Champa, where one of his proteges had raised a Hivadra Heruka statue in Misan, the religious center. And his reply after defeating his protege and occupying Champa it lasted about 20 years, was to raise this huge statue of Hivadra in the Bayon itself. Now, I asked this American Buddhist Acharya, Malcolm Smith, at a conference in London, why they would need so many Hivadra consecrations in Angkor. And he said that the conchas, that some simple samaya or vow or covenant ceremony would be necessary for anyone to be able to walk past this statue into the Bayon. And without that, he says the water would have turned to boiling metal in the mouth. So this is the kind of ceremony that Amoghavajra was presumably doing in Chang'an, where sometimes 4,000 people were involved. So it's okay. Now, what about the confrontation between Kkatanagar in the 13th century and Kublai Khan? Because Kkatanagar, as you know, was an aggressive king, an expanding king, the one who linked sections of the islands together, starting to form the Indonesia of today. He built huge statues, wonderful statues, some of them still in Leiden, some of them in Java.
Ya, ayo. Kalau mau lihat bahasa Inggris nih, Mas. Ya.
We got some interference.
Ya. Belum kelihatan, saya nggak tahu.
Can you hear me, Ania?
Belum kelihatan saya, Bu.
Oh, it's Thomas. Could you mute?
Apa beritahu?
You can hear the conversation with your daughter.
Yo.
Untuk mute.
Bahasa Inggris pembicaranya.
Ya, Mas. Mas.
So here are some of the extraordinary icons of Kkatanagar in the Singasari dynasty, very world famous, the most famous Durga of all, Mahakala and Ganesha. Okay, thanks. And he was engaged in, he fused Shaiva esoteric cult with a Buddhist esoteric cult. Nobody had done this anywhere else in the world. This is another Southern Sea innovation. And he confronted Kublai Khan because Kublai Khan was building fleets to invade the island states. He wanted to invade Japan, he wanted to invade Vietnam, Kampa, and finally Java. And we know that before he launched his expedition to Java, he took a Hivadra consecration so that Hivadra would protect his ships, protect his army, and give him the power to conquer Kkatanagar. Already the economy, the trading, the spices, the shipping of Java was attracting his attention, and he wanted that to be a part of his empire. So in this confrontation, we think that in twice he took the Hivadra consecration, and this was done by Pakpa, the great Tibetan guru, who was living at the court at the Yuan Mongol court in China. And it was he, having taken the consecration, he sent envoys to Java, to Kkatanagar, demanding far more tribute on an annual basis, and threatening them with invasion by a fleet. And indeed, in the Chinese accounts, the expedition, the motivation for Kublai seemed to be that that Kkatanagar defaced the envoy who was sent to Java. His face was cut and he was sent back to China. And that insult to the Chinese motivated him to send his invasion fleet. I think he'd been building the fleet well in advance. He was already, he'd tried to attack Japan and failed. And in response, Kkatanagar took a similar consecration to Akshobhya, who was his principal Buddhist deity, which was carried out in response to Kublai Khan taking the Hivadra Tantra. So this is the Mahakshobhya statue, which is known as the Joko Dolog statue in Surabaya, which was constructed by Kkatanagar, and where he would have taken his final vow in response to Kublai Khan's threat. This was the picture of the Yuan dynasty with the Khans way across to Europe, the Golden Horde further north, and the Yuan dynasty based at Dadu in Beijing. And here is the state already built by Kkatanagar, vassal states to Singasari. And here is a very interesting piece of archaeological research. In the archaeological research in Asia, I've given you the link there, which you probably know about as your archaeologist. But here is the map of Kublai's fleet stopping in Hainan, then in Champa, and through the islands, and they left a record in this island here before reaching Java. And the fleet left remains, I say, in the Karimata Strait here on these islands. What they say is Kublai's strong desire to expand his political power in East Asia and Southeast Asia by dispatching thousands of ships. We don't know exactly how many, but it was a very large number of ships. They were constructed of wood in Korea. We're not sure how good the construction was. We know that it was a very difficult journey indeed, because the sailors, the soldiers on board these ships, thousands of them, they'd probably never been in ships before. So it was a high risk expedition by Kublai. The Mongols, as we know, were supreme warriors on horseback. On land, nobody could defeat them. They defeated the armies of the world. But in boats, they were weak. And many of they went through some bad weather, we know that. And many of them were in serious trouble and weakened and in fact diseased on this expedition to Java. There are details of it in the in the Chinese historical records, and they give the exact dates of when they headed south and when they went back to China, having been defeated, because they got involved in Kkatanagar had just been killed in a civil war, but the evidence that we have is extraordinary. This Chinese inscription found on a stone in one of the islands talks, I can't read Chinese myself, but it talks about the number of ships, and about the journey and the dates, and it talks about putting into this island before they attacked Java and constructed smaller boats for getting ashore from the big ones. And they also talk about waiting for the winds to return, having suffered in the civil war and been tricked by the Javanese king, Kkatanagar's successor, his son. They took one side and were then mostly defeated on land. They eventually decided that they had to now go back to catch the monsoon winds to take them back to China and give up the invasion. So they in fact retired, and it's thought that probably a couple of thousand returned to China, and most of the army that was on the fleet died on the way, on the islands, or on Java itself. So it was a failed invasion. It failed in Japan. There, the Kimikaze winds blew the ships onto the rocks, and they hardly landed at all. In Vietnam, they landed in Champa and came in from the north, but they were eventually defeated there too. The Vietnamese put spikes into the river bed, and the Mongol ships drove onto the spikes. This is very well represented in Vietnamese museums, where the clever response of the Vietnamese defeated a huge Mongol fleet. So what we see from this is how these kings conducted their campaigns, military campaigns, with the aid of esoteric Buddhist or Shaiva deities, and that in doing so, they were applying a Brahminical type of supernatural power in a primarily Buddhist environment, which had never happened in India. So this was the contribution that Maritime Asia made. It took the religion, it took the powers and the ability through tantras to invoke deities into a court and into the power of a king, and they applied it. This changed the whole history of This changed the history of the region and the history of Buddhism, and it made the innovations were taking place in the south, outside India, and between Asian states, including the Chinese state. So we need to reassess how important what was happening in Java, in the peninsula, and in China in this period, because the history was being driven by Buddhist gurus and thinkers who were applying it, their religion and the powers they could invoke in the politics of the states of the region. So this was a huge contribution. This was the leading force for the new thinking in Asia that was taking place in these centuries. As Buddhism was declining in India and virtually disappearing, it was growing and expanding and changing in the island states of Southeast Asia and some of the mainland states connected to the same maritime route. And that is why we have the largest monuments built in Java and in Cambodia and in Champa. That they took ideas from India, renovated them as they were declining in India. They were flourishing in Southeast Asia, and they were leading the whole of Asia in the direction that the history was taking. So we're basically reconstructing the whole history of the period from the 9th to the 14th century. Okay, it's a complicated talk, and we went through a lot of different cultures, but I hope you've got the big picture of why these huge monumental centers developed where they did, and how that points us to the significance of this part of the world in a very long period of several centuries in the medieval period. So I'm very happy to take any questions.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Pak Peter, for the very interesting topic in this discussion. I agree with you that this topic is very complicated, but it's very important to change the paradigm from previous one to the new paradigm. That the country of Maritime Southeast Asia has very important and huge role to develop the new Buddhism to spread around the world. Jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, mungkin ini adalah suatu paradigma yang baru ya, di mana selama ini mungkin kalau kita membaca buku-buku histori yang ditulis oleh orang Belanda dan sebagainya yang menganggap bahwa negeri-negeri di Southeast Asian country itu hanya sebagai penerima saja. Tetapi dari riset yang dilakukan oleh Pak Peter Sarok dan timnya menunjukkan bahwa tidak seperti itu. Negara-negara di Southeast Asian Maritime Country itu ternyata mempunyai satu power yang sangat luar biasa dalam mengubah sejarah, terutama yang terkait dengan Buddhism dan bagaimana Buddhism itu membangun negara-negara yang kuat, sangat kuat di daerah tersebut. Baiklah Bapak Ibu, saya membuka pertanyaan. Yang pertama mungkin saya sampaikan Bapak Ibu bila yang ingin mengajukan pertanyaan langsung kepada Pak Peter, dipersilahkan satu dulu. Audience, you can ask directly to Pak Peter by directly speak to Pak Peter, and then we are going to read the question from the chat room.
Okay.
Monggo, Bapak Ibu, kalau ada pertanyaan dipersilahkan. Ada yang ingin bertanya langsung? Is there audience wants to ask directly to Pak Peter? Oh, Agni Mohtar. Agni raise hand.
Izin Mbak Nia, boleh?
Monggo, dipersilahkan.
Yeah, hello, Pak Peter. Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I'm just wondering, like, probably last month I attended seminars talking about the figurines from around South India or India in a greater sense that has been sailed away across the Indian Ocean. So basically, we were talking about objects with Indian influence that has been found in places like West Africa and all the way to the Mediterranean and etc. So I'm just wondering, like, because you said that, for example, the Amoga Pasha, if I'm not mistaken, was kind of like the cult was developed in Southeast Asia. The idea was not developed in India, but it was developed in Southeast Asia. Have you found like an object where the original idea was developed in Southeast Asia, but the object was found probably in India or even throughout the Europe or other places? Just wondering, like, how far the idea that was flourished in Southeast Asia spread in the past. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's a big question, an interesting one. The kind of esoteric Buddhism which entered the political theater, went into the courts, which produced this extraordinary religious architecture, like Borobudur. This was the equivalent of that in the modern world we know from Tibet. Now, the Tibetans, when Buddhism was basically destroyed in northern India at the end of the 12th century, many of the monks fled from the monasteries into Nepal and into Tibet. And in Tibet, the monks were also lamas, as today. The Dalai Lama is both a king, although a king in exile, and a lama, a teacher. So the kind of Buddhism which we can recognize in Tibetans today, which is now spreading all around the world. In Australia, it's a very, it's a large Tibetan Buddhism is important. In London, Tibetan Buddhism is important. In San Francisco, many places. This is the kind of Buddhism that we associate with Tibet. But what we're now discovering is that that kind of Buddhism was actually developed first in Southeast Asia. It was the esoteric deities, Herukas or Hivadras, who are, they're like a fierce kind of bodhisattva. They represent the supreme Buddhist powers. They were in the courts and they were advising kings on military strategies and invoking the Buddhas to protect them and to protect their states. That was developed in Southeast Asia. The Buddhists did not do that in India. The traces of it are all over Asia. We can find signs of esoteric Buddhism. I showed you Yuri Koklov saying, there we are in the Hershey Corridor, north of the Chinese capital, in the caves of Dunhuang and Mogao. You can find paintings of esoteric Buddhism, Buddhist deities. They came from the south. They came in ships. They came from southern India, from Srivijaya, Sumatra, and the peninsula and Java, and reached China, where their special power is recorded in those caves. So we've got a lot of evidence showing that these ideas were moving across the world at great speed, with certain brilliant individuals leading them, who played leading roles in societies across Asia. So for this period, we've got to think of Asia as being well connected and communicating fully from one side to the other, from India to China. And the key motor in that is Java, Sumatra, Cambodia, where kings were implementing the esoteric Buddhist notions in their courts and advancing their societies with the powers that this brought them. So the traces of esoteric Buddhism, which until recent centuries, we thought most of that just was in Tibet, and it came from Tibet, and there's something in Japan and in the early years in China. But now we see that esoteric Buddhism was all across Asia, and it was promoted and moved by the Buddhists who were active in Sumatra and in Java. And Hivadra was one of the great influential teachers who affected all societies from southern India to the Chinese capital. That's an extraordinary career that, that he impacted all of those societies. And you can see in the temples that are left and being excavated by the archaeologists, and in the statues which have been left, that men like him had an impact in Japan, in Java, in Sumatra, in Sri Lanka, in southern India. It was quite extraordinary. And at the center of all this creative expansion was the Buddhist communities of Srivijaya, Nusantara, the peninsula, and Java. So it's cross-Asian, and the motor is here. It's in Southeast Asia. It's not driven from India. In India, the monasteries were somewhat withdrawn. The monks were withdrawn. They had the same ideas, but they did not implement the idea of imposing and absorbing the power of the Vidyapitas, the holy sites of the Brahmins. They didn't have a way of bringing it into the power of the Buddhists. But in Southeast Asia, they did.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Anya, you're muted.
Muted, please.
I'm sorry. Okay. Pak Peter, now we move to the participant who asked the question from the chat room. The question is come from Bapak Abdul Rosid. Is Bapak Abdul Rosid still in the room? The question is, hello, Bapak Abdul Rosid, are you still in the room? Oh, okay. Mungkin karena Bapak Abdul Rosid sudah tidak lagi ada di ruangan, mungkin saya lemparkan pertanyaannya pada audiens yang ingin bertanya langsung kepada Pak Peter Saro. There is actually a question from Abdul Rosid, but since I'm questioning that Bapak Abdul Rosid is not in the room any longer, so we offer the question to the audience.
Okay.
Excuse me.
His question.
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Wait. Peter, I'm wondering, do you mind the PowerPoint share to the participants or not? If you don't mind, I will share it. But if you mind, I will.
No, that's fine. No, you can
okay?
Share it. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, okay, Abed, there is a fresh graduate from the Department of Archaeology. Abed Nico, please. The time is yours to ask the question to Pak Peter Sal.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for the time given. I would like to ask the opinion or the theory that we just discussed earlier today. I'm sorry if the question regarding the question that I would ask did not involve the time period that we are discussing. So I would like to ask for the 9th century, before the 9th century period. Now, are there any cultural precedent that underlays or made a quite strong foundation on why before the Indianization or before the Indian influence came to Indonesia and other part of Southeast Asia, are there any cultural precedent that actually affects on how the Indian or Chinese influence or foreign influence suddenly became suitable for the Southeast Asian culture, such as maybe the reasons why the Indonesian want to create something so massive is actually the perhaps the megalithic influence in the Southeast Asia or the Indonesian, because we previously in previous period we already know that there are some I cannot say it as a conclusion, but there are some patterns that local people before the Indianization started in the Southeast Asian, whether it's on mainland like in some cultural heritage at Laos or Indonesia. Is this a possibility that actually the reason why the influence is not just because the foreign influence that come to Indonesia, but the cultural precedent or cultural types or the dynamics of Indonesian culture itself that made the Indonesian really thirsty on building something in massive size? Thank you for the opportunity given.
Yes, well, that's a good question. There is no question that the people who built Borobudur did not learn this from Indian architects. This was a Javanese genius. This was they had the ability and the vision to build a monument full of meaning. We are still trying to understand Borobudur today. But where did that genius come from? That was in the people of Java. It was there in the earlier cultures. But what they did was, because Buddhism was so important to the king, they had access to resources, much resource, so that they could begin to build a thing on the scale of Borobudur. It is gigantic, and so is Mendut and Pawan. So this huge center is built. Where did they get the idea of building on a scale like that? Well, that comes out of Javanese heads. This is the genius of the Javanese people and the perfection of the building technique. It was a difficult job, Borobudur, because the stone kept slipping down the side, and they had to change the design. But the stone that was used, the carving that was done, it's still in incredibly good condition today. This andesite stone resists the weather. And so the design of 5 terraces with circular terraces on the top, with the significant mandalas built into that design, that is purely Javanese genius. And it comes from the creative roots of the people of Java. It would have gone into earlier religions in the prehistoric cultures. We know that there's a common prehistoric culture all across Asia. The archaeologists called it Sahuian because they first defined it in a little port in Vietnam. But that was common across Asia. But once the once the religious archaeologists and architects had the means to build on a huge scale, they had to invent it all themselves. The techniques for building, the techniques for decorating, the techniques for doing all the Buddhas on Borobudur, 500 Buddhas. There is no monument like it on earth. It was created from the genius of the Javanese people, collectively contributing to building something which the whole world wants to come and visit and look at, because there is nothing like it anywhere. And it's a parallel thing in Cambodia. Angkor Wat is the largest religious temple on earth. And that is the genius of the Khmer people, who built a Vishnu temple on a scale with a perfection of carving and a superb architectural technique, so that it's lived for many years in the jungle without maintenance, and it's still a fantastic building. This again was the genius of the Khmer people. So it's the local power of imagination, which applies religious ideas, local and possibly international, puts them together into the local mix with the artists and the architects. We don't know their names, but these were brilliant people. And they produced the most wonderful monuments on earth to support the state that they were a part of. And so that is entirely, that's the genius of local culture. It's not anything that you can take from India or from China. You can use their technology, you can use their ideas to produce the artworks and the monuments that they produce. That is local genius.
Okay, Abed.
Thank you for your answer, and thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you, Abed. Pak Peter, do you mind if I offer one very short question, because Holden already raised his hand.
Yes, please.
Holden, would you please ask your very short question?
Okay, Punina izin bertanya. My question is, I wonder about how is the Buddhist. Can you hear my voice?
Yeah.
Okay. How is the Buddhist institution in the past? I mean, when we're talking about the Buddhism, we usually talk about like international connections, such as we have Chinese records which mention monks and etc. So I wonder whether Buddhist institution in the past had as much as freedom under the political power, so the connection, international connection, is possible, or whether it is merely individual deeds or a collective mission, or how is the connection between each Buddhist center in the past throughout the region, whether it is the same with Hinduism, or whether it is indeed a uniqueness of Buddhism that made it possible for kind of like extensive international connection. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. I think what we have to understand is that the medieval world had no internet. They had boats. It took a long time for the boats to cross the ocean, but they did cross and they did communicate. And when the passage of monks going to India to study Sanskrit, to study the texts in the universities in northern India, these monks would visit all the Buddhist communities on the way. And they mostly, if you were going from China, your monastery or your local king would supply the money to the monk who will go to India to bring back a text or a statue or something which we can use in our monastery. So they would finance the monk to go in a boat for sometimes 10 years before they returned. And they would stop at all the Buddhist communities on the way. And then they would learn Sanskrit in Palembang in Sumatra. There was a great school teaching the texts and teaching Sanskrit. Sanskrit's a difficult language. So they would stay for about a year in Sumatra, learn Sanskrit so that when they got to the big Indian monasteries like Nalanda and Vikramashila, they could study the texts. And in these places, there was something like 10,000 monks. They were big universities, highly literate. And then they would go back home, again, visiting the Buddhist sites on the way. So there was news of what was going on in the Buddhist world from China, Korea, Japan, Java, Sumatra, India, Sri Lanka, and India. So the Buddhist communities in this period were all connected. I mean, today you have something similar in Islam, when many people go to the Middle East on the Hajj. It's a Buddhist community which helps each other. Java has always had a connection with Yemen Buddhists when they go on the Hajj. It's a community with similar ideas, which in different geography, which is connected. So we have to think of the Buddhists as being well connected, as Muslims are connected for the great festivals in Islam today. There's something similar. The ideas bring people together. Or you have the great Christian empires, where again, it's churches to churches to churches. The thing about religions is they have ideas, and big ideas, about how the earth began and what happens in this life, what happens in the next life, and they connect people through those ideas. So it's the ideas which are international, and they are implanted in communities. So yes, the Buddhists knew their communities across Asia at this time, and the new ideas traveled fast. You can see them moving with Amoghavajra from Kanchi in South India to Sri Lanka, to Sumatra, to Java, to China, to Tibet, all in one lifetime. So we think that they were not well connected because they had no internet, but it's not true. They were well connected. They knew each other. They had relationships right across Asia, and they had the means to travel by ship over huge distances. So we have to think of it as a connected world.
Okay, Khaldun. I believe that there is still many questions in our head, but unfortunately, I have to say that we are running out of time.
Okay.
So I'm very sorry. I have to finish it in this time. I have no right to summarize the lecture, but we know that what delivered by Pak Peter Sarok is very useful to enrich our knowledge about the Southeast Asian country in the past that were very powerful. So we still hope that another time we have another opportunity to meet Pak Peter again to discuss different topic which need to share among the students, among the scholars in Southeast Asia. I just say thank you very much to Pak Peter for your time, for your knowledge. We are very honored to have you here in this time. Terima kasih untuk Bapak Ibu semuanya yang sudah bergabung. Sampai ketemu lagi di lain kesempatan. Pak Peter, thank you very much. Will we meet again in another chance and opportunity? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to speak always. UGM is a very important place. I'm so glad that so many of your archaeological friends came for this talk. It's a very complicated subject, I know, but it's covering a big area of geography and some important religious thinking and a great deal of architecture and statuary. And I hope I've given you some clarification on the big picture in this medieval period in the past. So thanks again for inviting me. It's my pleasure. There's lots more to be said and done on this, lots of research going on, and I think it will intensify in future.
Bapak Ibu, Ibu Mimi mohon maaf karena beliau harus pergi mengejar kereta. Pak Peter, Mimi already left because he has to catch the train solo. So he sent warm regards to you. Say thank you very much from Ibu Mimi.
Thank you.
Bapak
Thank
Ibu,
you, Pak Peter. Thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bila ada kurang-kurangnya, mohon maaf yang sebesar-besarnya Bapak Ibu sekalian. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam.
Waalaikumsalam.
Terima kasih.
Peter, when are you going to Yogyakarta? Oh, sudah pergi. Mohon izin